I think it used to be maybe like 70% of my decision making was affected by the founding team. Now it's probably like 95%.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host for the VC 10X podcast. And today we have Arin Özkula with us. Arin is a general partner at 500 Emerging Europe, a pre-seed and seed fund investing in Eastern Europe, Turkey, and the Baltics region. In this episode, we talk about what is 500 Emerging Europe, how is the startup ecosystem in Eastern Europe different from Western Europe ecosystem, what sectors are the most popular and promising in the region, how they back founders building global companies, what is the portfolio construction strategy at 500 Emerging Europe, and lots more. So, without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Podcast 10X, where I help VCs start and run their own podcast. While I was running VC 10X, this podcast that you're listening to right now, I asked my VC guests, why don't you start your own podcast? I mean, it's the best form of marketing for VCs. As they say, VC is a people play more than even a capital play. A podcast enables you to put your people at the front, your portfolio founders, your partners, and co investors. It's a great way to build a brand and win competitive deals. It activates all your marketing channels in a single shot, be it YouTube or blog post or newsletter or social media. Everything gets activated in a single shot. And I get the same response from all the VCs that it's a lot of work and we don't have the time for it. I said, all right, let me handle the work for you from pre recording, editing, publishing to making social media clips. All you have to do is show up on a call, hit record, do the recording using the well researched outline we provide you with, and you're done. We handle everything else. You know what they said? All right, let's give it a shot. So if you are a VC and want to up your marketing and branding game, I'd love to work with you. And if you're thinking there are too many VC podcasts already, remember there are way more VC firms out there. And if you're not standing out, you're losing out. So if you want to work with me on starting your podcast, go to podcast10x.com and book a call today. I'll add the link in the description and show notes below. Look forward to working with you. Hey, Arin, so good to have you on the VC 10X podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Prashant. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on. And to start things off, can we first have your story and how you started investing?
Yeah, sure. So let me give you a brief background. So I joined Emerging Europe at the beginning of the current fund, and I've been a GP for the last 3 years now. Prior to that, I worked at another fund, actually, that invested more across sort of Turkey and Eastern Europe, but at Series A's. I used to be a private equity guy before that, and have a background in M&A, finance, consulting, that sort of stuff. Actually, a mechanical aerospace engineer, got my degree from Cornell, but never really did that. Moved very quickly into finance after graduating. And I think, like, I'd say the reason why sort of I stumbled upon ventures and sort of startups in general was because I had a roommate in college who became a co-founder at this company called Peak Games, which was this sort of one of the success stories coming out of Turkey. That they got acquired by Zynga for I think over a $1.5 billion, big sort of company. And I used to spend a lot of time with them when they were a small team. And honestly, I didn't have the guts to take that risk to jump on board at the time. But I did end up, getting to know a lot of people, becoming interested in tech in general, in tech startups, and also sort of did a couple of angel investments on the side, help out a friend, sort of launched this sneaker e-commerce company, all that sort of stuff. This was like 10, 15 years ago. And I think that's mainly what stimulated my appetite over that time of period, where was always trying to more and more get more into venture, which ended up happening now, I think 8, 9 years ago.
Right, that's a very interesting story. And now you're building a 500 Emerging Europe, and your t
hmm
shirt gives it away loud and clear, right? And so tell us about 500 Emerging Europe and what's the goal here?
Yeah, so 500 Emerging Europe is a fund where we invest. We're currently investing out of a 70 million euro fund in emerging European founders, which for us is like anywhere across Turkey, Eastern Europe, Baltics as well, or also into founders from these regions globally. At pre-seed and seed, And the main thesis of the fund is to help them transition to the US very quickly to hopefully become global success stories. The thesis is around the fact that the engineering and entrepreneurial talent across emerging Europe is quite strong. Yet the local markets are generally too small to build large businesses in. So founders across the region have to be global from day one, which typically means they have to get to large markets like the US as quickly as possible. So our portfolio funders are typically based in SF, or at least spend a significant portion of their time there, while keeping the engineering teams across emerging Europe, which also have some benefit from that kind of a local talent. And this is the talent that we are very excited to back. So, these emerging European founders building global businesses across sort of this region. I think there is a lot that we can do. So that's what we've been focusing on pretty much.
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting approach. So you are helping Eastern European founders
Mhm.
relocate and build their companies from US instead. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. So the way it works is, so we're investing across the entire region into people who want to build sort of global businesses, quote unquote, which does end up happening being sort of very tech heavy, globally focused businesses, which means, they do have to. So a lot of the things that we're investing in are sort of dev tools, AI, ML, data infra, that sort of stuff. So enterprise software businesses. So, their local markets are not the right markets to do customer discovery in, to try to find the right talents, to try to find the right sort of investors even. So we do help them very quickly get to, US, and that's typically SF, make a lot of intros to other angels, funds, etc. that we know on the ground so that they get settled in a little bit and then try to grow there. That's the idea.
Totally. That's a very interesting approach there. And also tell us about what's the startup ecosystem like in Turkey, in Eastern Europe, and the
Hmm.
Baltics region. So tell us
Hmm.
about
Hmm.
that.
So I'd say it's like when you average the region, I think it's still in its infancy stage and things are sort of at the beginning and it's quite sort of growing. The common denominator across the region, I would say, is the abundance of engineering talent. So that was, always there probably. What's been changing over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years is the exponential increase in the number of global success stories that we're seeing out of the region. So what I mean by that is historically, sort of the successful leading startups in Turkey and across Eastern Europe were local copycats of global success stories, the local e-commerce platform, the local vertical SaaS, and so on. And I think what's been happening more recently is that founders have realized that it's very tough to build significantly large businesses locally, except for a few industries like consumer or fintech, where the markets are just not large enough. And in parallel, there have been a lot of success stories coming out of the region, targeting global markets, moving their HQ to US. And naturally, the founders or the employees of some of these sort of companies went out to start new things. And that sort of flywheel has started turning across emerging Europe for a while now, creating this kind of snowball effect of this, ever increasing number of people who are much more globally minded in terms of their approach. So I think we'll see that more and more. So several of our portfolio companies have such roots as well. They're early employees or co-founders of companies like UiPath out of Romania, Citus Data, Balabit, Bonsai Cloud. So they've worked at Wise, all of these sort of stories that have come out of the region and became sort of global companies. And other people are, friends with these people. These ecosystems are quite small on the one hand as well. So they're sort of close friends. They know each other. They've had the sort of know-how and the global mindset sort of trickle down to them as well. And it sort of helps grow the ecosystem in general. And I think over the next like 10 years, we'll see an exponential growth in terms of the number of founders who are coming out of the region, probably.
Right, totally agree. But I would like to learn from you. Haven't we seen any startups that have gone big and gone global from within Europe? Are there any cases like that?
You mean started out from Eastern Europe and then sort of gone global?
Yeah, maybe Eastern Europe or maybe Europe in general. I think there are some cases for Europe, but let's talk about Eastern Europe then.
So I mean, obviously, there are a lot of European companies that have grown quite big. Outside of Eastern Europe, there have been a number of good cases. So a couple of companies that I just mentioned. So UiPath, obviously Romanian company, had the roots in Romania, had the team in Romania, moved their HQ to US, grew over there as well, had a big IPO. So that's one of the sort of the largest stories. A lot of other companies across the region also did that kind of a switch earlier on, like Citus Data is a good example. So they were a Turkish company, grew in the US mainly after some period of time that got acquired by Microsoft for a good sort of amount of money. Um, so that's also the founders of Science Data are the founders of a portfolio company from our current fund as well. So they went on to establish this new company called Ubi Cloud, which we invested in. Balabit, Bonsai Cloud, sort of like acquisitions by Cisco, etc. So all of these success stories, they're typically known as more US companies because their HQs in the US. However, like all of the engineering teams are across Eastern Europe typically, and that's the typical type of investment that we try to make.
Right, totally. And talking about engineering talent, what gives Eastern Europe an edge on that front? Is it the quality of engineering talent, or is it about the cost effectiveness of the talent that's
Mhm,
available
mhm.
there?
So I think the quality is definitely there, as is the cost effectiveness. So obviously, it's much more economical, let's say, to hire across Eastern Europe. Uh, but also it's also high retention as well. So a lot of really strong engineers within these markets, they don't really have maybe that many opportunities in terms of where to work at. So some of these people are quite sort of have longer retention, which is very good for the company. And I think in terms of the market dynamics, Eastern Europe has this um, advantage that's going its way, where as I said, local markets are quite small, but that ends up happening to be a good thing. So what I mean by that is that pushes you, like compared to let's say Western Europe, that pushes you to be global from day one. So in some of the sort of the more established Western European markets, Germany, France, etc., we see cases of tech companies being kind of trapped in their local, let's say, mid-sized market, where the market is large enough to get you to maybe 5, 10, 20 million ARR, but there's a ceiling on that because the countries are not that big in terms of, let's say, data infrastructures buyers within the country. And it's not easy to expand across Europe either. So a lot of these companies end up trying to expand from like Germany to France to Poland to etc. And that's typically not an easy task either. I mean, some people think, especially sort of outside of Europe, that Europe is this unified region because we keep calling it Europe, but it's surprisingly, like, ironically, not surprisingly, made up of a lot of different countries with different languages, regulations, cultures, sales channels, all that sort of stuff. So it's not really easy to grow across Western Europe. Um, so that's why Eastern European founders have this advantage in a way. I mean, that they have to be. It's a necessity to be global, from day one. My partner at the fund has coined this phrase internally, which we've also printed on our merch, saying emerging Europe is a mindset. Because emerging European founders are inherently global from day one, so they have this kind of mindset to be very sort of uh, hustling, being sort of US first, being global first, which separates them from some of their locally focused Western European counterparts, I would say.
Right, totally. And let's try to contrast the Western European ecosystem and the Eastern European ecosystem and where they stand
Hmm.
currently in regards to each other and how successful they are.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can speak better for the Eastern European ecosystem. So, as I said, a lot of the talent locally is quite strong, and there has always been strong engineering talent. Now, I think the entrepreneurial part of that engineering talent is sort of growing as well because people are learning more and more to what it means to work at a startup. They sort of gone through that journey. They know what it means to be more entrepreneurial in terms of their approach. They do get more sales skills, all that sort of stuff. So I think from that perspective, things are growing. In terms of the local markets, from a investment sort of venture sort of ecosystem. I think it's a lot of uh, pre-seed and seed funds, I would say, are much more local and in angels as well. Um, because I think, as I said, it makes sense to be uh, sort of global very quickly, which means you're raising your pre-seed and seed very locally from some of these local funds. But as is the case with our fund as well, hopefully a lot of the companies in our portfolio end up sort of raising their A's from the Sequoias, Andreessens, Lightspeeds, Google Ventures of the world. So the kind of the financing value chain gets very quickly shifted to London to US typically.
Right, totally. And at the stage when you are investing, are you investing in an entity that's locally registered in the Eastern European region, or are you investing after it's registered in US? How does that work?
So I mean, we can do both, and we do both, but typically, like I think probably over 85% of the things that we invested in have been Delaware C corps, so U.S. companies, mainly because of regulations and then sort of investor sort of appetite as well. So from a regulatory perspective, in some of these regions, you don't really have safe notes. It's not really easy to give stock options, all that sort of stuff. So everyone wants to be able to do that. And then, as I said, most of the companies that we're investing in want to be US first anyway, which means they'll end up over there and they'll raise from US funds, so they want to make it a US company typically.
Right, totally, and makes sense. And what are the most promising and popular sectors that are in focus in the Eastern European region?
So yeah, I think in terms of, I mean, from our perspective, we are a generalist fund, so we do invest in anything really across pre-seed and seed. But as I said, probably more than 80% of the current fund is invested in data infrastructure, dev tools, AI, ML. So due to the engineering talent probably across the region, and probably also due to the fact that a lot of the things that we're investing in, they want to be global, it ends up being that a significant portion of exciting companies are trying to tackle more technical problems across the region. Um, in Turkey specifically, there is a bit of a sort of difference or sort of something specific to Turkey where there's a lot of gaming talent because of that exit that I mentioned you of Peak Games to Zynga. I think after that exit, there have been probably more than like 30 studios, gaming studios that have been established, who are either early co-founders, employees, or have some sort of connection to Peak, which have went on to raise like large Series A's and B's, which I think we'll continue to see. So there's a lot of know-how within the ecosystem. So Turkey is a bit different from that perspective, specifically. But I think across the region in general, you do see a lot of sort of technical talent that are tackling more AI, ML, dev tools, data infra stuff.
Right, totally. And when you're doing the investing, what's the key things you look for in the founders, and especially that aspect that are these founders ready to win in the global market?
Mhm, mhm. I mean, yeah, so we typically invest across VCs, so I think more than 95% of our decision making is about the founders. So we try to gauge how driven, how entrepreneurial they are, nothing sort of surprising there, nothing rocket science. We try to do that in a couple of different ways. So number one, I would say a lot of the types of people that we've invested in are the people that we know. So a good percentage of our portfolio company founders are you know, founders of other portfolio companies that we've invested in, employees, other people that we've known through our network. So we've known them for a while. We also do this talent mapping workflow where we meet exceptional talent um globally early on and try to build relationships with them, sometimes even years before they start a company. And naturally, in these cases, it's easier to make a decision as we get to know them over a much longer period of time. The more challenging cases where we're meeting with the sort of the founders for the first time, obviously, and in those cases, we do try to spend time with them as much as possible to understand the sort of the drive, way of thinking, makeup of the team, sales skills, quickness and execution, all that sort of stuff. And we do this typically, we do try to be quite quick. So, our process takes a couple of weeks at most, typically like 1 or 2 weeks maybe. And we do try to do our own market, product, tech due diligence and research. But, the reason that why we're doing this is not to sort of understand or get a better analysis of these markets better than what the founders, can come up with or have strong market thesis or anything like that, but to be able to have sort of deeper and smarter conversations with some of these founders to gauge really their way of thinking and their characters. Because at pre-seed it's tough to be 100% right most of the time anyway with the initial approach. So what I mean by that is a lot of the successful companies that we've invested in previous funds um, started that out doing something that's either slightly or in some cases significantly different than sort of what they ended up doing and becoming successful in the end. So it's the founder's ability to learn and navigate around the market that made them successful. So that's what we try to look for typically more than anything else, really.
Right, totally. That's awesome. And another aspect that I've heard from European VCs, they look for in founders is their language proficiencies. Are they proficient in English and can speak professionally so that they can win deals from US and countries like that?
Yeah, I
So
mean,
is that, yeah,
yeah, that's definitely something that we look at.
yeah,
Honestly, I think the world has become so, global anyway that a lot of the
right,
founders that we meet do have good English and they can sort of
right,
do that. But that's definitely, I mean, we are primarily a US focused fund, which means,
right.
a lot of the people will be based there. So they have to have that kind of a, English proficiency, obviously, but also the sort of have some sort of idea of the culture, be comfortable with it, be comfortable living there as well. So yeah, those are things that we look for as well.
Right, totally awesome. And once you've made an investment, how is the journey from there on for founders? How are you helping them figure out the initial product and get to product market fit and figure out the path to it?
So I like saying that we typically make a lot of intros and not much else. The reason why I'm saying that is so the typical process for us, we do have close conversations with a lot of the founders, but we don't really get any board seats, veto rights, that sort of stuff. It's pre-seeds. It's really unnecessary. It's way too early. So we do have a lot of uh, daily, sort of weekly conversations, ideate together, all that sort of stuff. But more, I think like that's quite normal. But more than that, I think what we try to do, because a lot of the founders, as I said, are in different businesses. So, there's a MLOps infra layer for healthcare company that we've invested in. There's like so all sort of different things that we've invested in. So there's no way that I can help them with product or strategy as well as I would like to. So what we try to do is find the right angel investors, right the experts, right people within our network to make introductions to them, hopefully, so that they can sort of ideate some of these things with them as well. And then we make a lot of investor intros, to angels and sort of Series A's, late seed kind of investors as well. And we do have a good community within the portfolio founders, so that's also helpful.
Right, totally. And would you like to mention some of your portfolio companies that you've backed and are doing exciting work?
Yeah, I mean, we have made 30 investments from the previous fund. So that was vintage 2016. We have three unicorns from that fund. Carbon Health in the US, billion to one as well. Insiders. So Carbon Health is within the obviously the healthcare space. They're doing primary care clinics. Billion to one is doing more across sort of liquid biopsy, more of a biotech ish kind of a play, and inside there is marketing automation. And we are also investors in a number of other sort of successful companies like Firefly, Plum, Massive Bio, which are all generally based either in SF or some in London as well. And out to the current fund, we've been investing for the last 3 years. We've also made a total of 30 investments from this fund as well now, and they went on to raise more than 100 million so far uh, across the portfolio. We have a couple of YC companies, a couple of companies that have raised now their CSBs. So yeah, that's how the sort of portfolio is structured.
Totally, that's very interesting. And can you give us an insight into how you think about portfolio construction at Emerging Europe?
So in terms of the portfolio construction, we made, as I said, like 30 investments, and we'll probably end up doing 35, 40 in total. Um, this also includes what we are calling silver bullets, which are less than like 400 or 500K tickets, that are more exploratory that we're making. The average ticket size for us is around 1 million. So I think we'll keep investing this year as well. We're in the sort of third year of the fund. And then the rest of the 50% of the fund is reserved for follow-ons, which we started deploying as well. So yeah, that's the idea.
Totally great approach there. And coming to my last main question before we do the rapid fire, and this about what's been your biggest learning investing in startups over the years?
Yeah, I think uh, the biggest one probably is that I mean, it's not something that, that's once again like rocket science and not something that no one knows, but you have to have that, you have to really believe in it, that it's definitely about the founders. So what I mean by that is sometimes you're looking at the markets, the product, competition, whether it's the right time or not, and which is fair, like you should look at all of that and have that conversation with the founders to better understand their thinking. But it really doesn't matter like how much you like a market or the product. From my experience at least, the best founders, even if they're in somewhat sort of red oceany markets, or somewhat competitive landscapes, or whatever it is, or they don't really have a great product at that time, the best founders typically figure things out and navigate into the right path. So it's, we've over the years, I think I've sort of moved more and more into. So I think it used to be maybe like 70% of my decision making was affected by the founding team. Now it's probably like 95%.
Totally, that's awesome. And now let's do the rapid fire round, wherein I'll
Yep.
ask you five quick questions about the investing you're doing at 500 Emerging Europe, and you have to give five quick answers, right?
All right.
So the first one is, what are the sectors and regions you invest in?
Generalist fund, invest in anything, but as I said, dev tools, AI, ML, data infra are the main things. And then Turkey, Eastern Europe, and Baltics founders globally.
Right, awesome. What's the typical stage of investment?
Pre-seed and seed.
What's the typical check size you put in?
250K up to 2 million. The average is around 1 million.
Okay, where can founders apply for funding in case there's a direct way?
There isn't, but reached out to me at LinkedIn, send me a mail at arin@500.co. I'm sure you find me somewhere.
Totally. Last one, where can our listeners follow you?
I generally share stuff on LinkedIn a bit, so I'm more old school, I guess. And then we do have a podcast called CC, where we chat with emerging European founders as well, sort of talent, their stories, how they moved sort of more globally, all that sort of stuff. So, do listen to that as well, hopefully.
Yeah, awesome. I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes below so that our listeners can get there easily. Thanks so much for coming on, Erin, and I wish you happy investing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure hosting you.